She said, "I feel bored in this relationship, I need thrills and I will be back." I said, "Life is too short for regrets." Then I sold our house and moved across the country. 5 weeks later, she was frantically calling my family to find me. I never thought I'd be the type of guy to completely uproot his life over a relationship, but sometimes people surprise themselves when pushed to their limits. I met Jessica at a local art gallery opening on a rainy Thursday evening in Nashville. I'd only gone because my colleague dragged me along, claiming I needed more culture in my life than spreadsheets and quarterly reports. As a data analyst for a mid-sized tech consulting firm, I lived a pretty structured existence. Wake up at 6:30, gym, work, home, repeat. Jessica worked part-time at the gallery while finishing her journalism degree, and she had this infectious energy that made everyone around her feel more alive. She was explaining a particularly abstract sculpture to an elderly couple when I first noticed her, gesturing enthusiastically while somehow making complete sense of what looked like random metal scraps to me. When she caught me staring and smiled, I felt something shift in my chest that I hadn't experienced since college. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. Jessica had opinions about everything: the artist's technique, the gallery's lighting choices, the pretentious wine they were serving. I found myself laughing more than I had in months, drawn to her passionate way of seeing the world. She was everything I wasn't: spontaneous where I was planned, artistic where I was analytical, adventurous where I was cautious. When she suggested we ditch the gallery and find a real bar, I surprised myself by agreeing immediately. That first year together was transformative in ways I hadn't thought possible. Jessica introduced me to parts of Nashville I'd lived in for 6 years but never really explored. We'd take spontaneous weekend trips to the Smoky Mountains, her camera always ready to capture some hidden waterfall or forgotten barn that she'd somehow heard about through her network of creative friends. She had this gift for finding magic in ordinary moments, turning a mundane grocery run into an adventure by insisting we try cooking some cuisine we'd never attempted before, or convincing me to take late-night drives to discover hole-in-the-wall diners where she'd interview the owners for potential story ideas. I started stepping out of my comfort zone in ways that felt natural rather than forced. Jessica would drag me to poetry readings, underground music venues, and art markets where I'd watch her network effortlessly with photographers, writers, and musicians who all seemed to adore her curiosity and genuine interest in their work. She had this way of making people feel seen and important, asking questions that went beyond surface-level politeness. I admired how she could walk into any room and find the most interesting person there, then spend an hour learning about their passion project or life philosophy. The physical chemistry between us was undeniable, but it was her mind that really captivated me. Jessica would wake up with ideas for articles, photo series, or random adventures that most people would dismiss as impractical. She'd research historical ghost tours, plan elaborate scavenger hunts through downtown Nashville, or suggest we spend an entire Saturday learning pottery just because she'd always wondered how clay felt between her fingers. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself saying yes to experiences I would have automatically declined before meeting her. What struck me most was how Jessica never tried to change me. She simply created space for parts of myself I didn't know existed. I started taking photos during our adventures, initially just to document our trips but eventually because I genuinely enjoyed capturing moments through her artistic lens. She'd teach me about composition and lighting while I'd help her organize her growing portfolio and navigate the technical aspects of building an online presence for her journalism work. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I thought. After 2 years together, we decided to buy a house. I'd been saving for years, living in the same efficient one-bedroom apartment and driving a reliable Honda that I'd paid off early. Jessica was still renting a tiny studio above a vintage clothing store, spending most of her income on camera equipment and spontaneous trips that she claimed were research for future articles. When we started looking at properties, I naturally gravitated toward practical choices, good bones, solid investment potential, reasonable maintenance costs. Jessica had different priorities entirely. She fell in love with this Victorian house in Nashville's historic district the moment we walked through the front door. Built in 1892, it had original hardwood floors, 12-foot ceilings, and a wraparound porch that Jessica immediately declared perfect for morning coffee and evening wine. The house needed work, outdated electrical, plumbing that made concerning noises, and a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 1970s. My analytical mind calculated renovation costs, property taxes, and potential resale challenges. Jessica saw character, charm, and endless possibilities for creating something beautiful together. "This place has stories to tell," she said, running her hands along the carved banister of the main staircase. "Can't you feel the history here? All the families who've called this home, all the memories these walls have witnessed." I couldn't feel any of that, but I could see how her eyes lit up as she described transforming the neglected garden space into a photography studio and turning the third-floor attic into her writing sanctuary. Her excitement was infectious enough that I found myself nodding along to her vision, even as I mentally added up the costs. We put in an offer that same afternoon. Jessica insisted on including a handwritten letter to the elderly sellers about how much we'd love and care for their family home. 3 days later, we got the house. I handled the mortgage paperwork, inspections, and contractor negotiations while Jessica researched the house's history, discovered it had been built by a local railroad baron, and started planning renovations that would honor its heritage while making it ours. The first few months of homeownership were exactly what I'd hoped for. We spent weekends at home improvement stores, Jessica picking out paint colors and fixtures while I focused on practical upgrades like a new water heater and updated electrical panels. She had this way of making even tedious projects feel romantic, bringing me coffee while I installed new outlets or surprising me with takeout from whatever ethnic restaurant she discovered that week. We hosted dinner parties for our friends, Jessica's journalism classmates mixing surprisingly well with my colleagues from the tech firm. Around this same time, Jessica landed her dream job as a junior reporter at Bloom, a trendy lifestyle magazine that covered Nashville's emerging arts scene, local businesses, and cultural events. The pay wasn't spectacular, but Jessica was thrilled to finally have a platform for the kind of storytelling she'd been practicing since college. Her first assignment was profiling young entrepreneurs who were revitalizing neglected neighborhoods, and she threw herself into the work with characteristic enthusiasm. I got promoted to senior analyst at my firm, which came with a significant salary bump and the flexibility to work remotely a few days per week. Everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly: stable careers, beautiful home, shared goals for the future. I started thinking seriously about engagement rings, even went so far as to casually ask Jessica's sister about her preferences in jewelry during a family barbecue. But somewhere around month 6 of homeownership, I noticed subtle changes in Jessica's energy. She'd come home from work with this restless expression, like she'd been thinking about something she couldn't quite articulate. Our weekend renovation projects started feeling more like obligations than adventures. Instead of excitedly showing me paint swatches or discussing which room to tackle next, she'd spend Saturday mornings scrolling through social media, comparing our quiet domestic routine to the exciting lives her college friends seemed to be living in cities like New York and Los Angeles. "Don't you ever feel like we're settling into middle age a little too early?" she asked one evening as we sat on our porch, me reviewing quarterly reports while she edited photos from a recent assignment. "Like, we're 28 and 31, but we're living like we're 45. House, careers, dinner parties with the same people every few weeks. Is this really what being young adults should look like?" I looked around at our beautiful home, thought about our stable jobs and growing savings account, and honestly couldn't understand what she was questioning. This was exactly what I'd always wanted: building something real and lasting with someone I loved. But Jessica's dissatisfaction was becoming harder to ignore, and I started worrying that the life we'd built together was beginning to feel more like a cage than a foundation to her. Everything changed when Jessica started working with Owen Martinez, a freelance adventure photographer who specialized in extreme sports and travel journalism for Bloom magazine. Owen was everything I wasn't: ruggedly handsome in that outdoorsy way, with sun-bleached hair and forearms covered in tattoos documenting his various expeditions around the world. He drove a beat-up Land Rover covered in stickers from national parks and surf competitions, and seemed to live entirely out of a collection of worn canvas bags that suggested he could disappear on assignment at a moment's notice. Jessica's first collaborative project with Owen was documenting Nashville's underground rock climbing community, a subculture I didn't even know existed in our relatively flat city. She'd come home energized in a way I hadn't seen since her early days at the magazine, talking rapidly about the climber's philosophy of pushing physical and mental limits, the trust required between climbing partners, and Owen's incredible ability to capture the raw emotion of someone conquering their fears 30 feet off the ground. "You should see how he works," Jessica told me one evening, showing me contact sheets of Owen's photographs on her laptop. "He doesn't just take pictures, he becomes part of the story." Today, he free climbed alongside this woman who was attempting her first overhang route, talking her through her panic while somehow managing to document the entire experience. His photos don't just show what happened, they make you feel what it was like to be there. I studied the images, which were admittedly impressive. Owen had captured moments of pure vulnerability and triumph that made even me feel the vertigo and exhilaration of being suspended by fingertips and determination. But what bothered me wasn't his talent, it was the way Jessica's voice changed when she talked about him, taking on this breathless quality that reminded me of how she used to talk about our early adventures together. The collaborations became more frequent. Jessica started staying late at the magazine office, working on what she called special projects with Owen that required extensive research and planning. She'd come home with stories about his latest assignment, documenting surfers in Hawaii, following a band through underground venues in Chicago, capturing the daily lives of ranch hands in Montana. Each story seemed designed to highlight how exciting and spontaneous his life was compared to our predictable routine of work, home renovations, and weekend dinners with friends. "Owen thinks I have real potential as a travel journalist," Jessica mentioned casually one Saturday morning as I was reviewing contractor bids for updating our bathroom. "He's been showing my work to editors at some national publications. Says my perspective on local culture could translate really well to international stories." "That's great," I said, though something cold was settling in my stomach. "What kind of international stories?" "Well, he's got this assignment coming up in Costa Rica, documenting sustainable tourism initiatives. The magazine's considering sending a writer-photographer team, and Owen suggested me for the writing component. It would be 3 weeks, but it could really launch my career in a completely different direction." 3 weeks in Costa Rica with Owen. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but Jessica must have sensed my hesitation because her tone immediately became defensive. "This is exactly what I was talking about," she said, closing her laptop with more force than necessary. "You want me to stay small, stay safe, keep limiting myself to local Nashville stories when there's this entire world of experiences out there." Owen gets it. He understands that real journalism requires taking risks and pushing boundaries. I wanted to point out that I'd never asked her to limit herself, that I'd supported every assignment and encouraged her ambitions from the beginning. But the comparison to Owen stung because it felt deliberately cruel. Jessica was creating a narrative where I was the anchor holding her back from her true potential, while Owen was the wind in her sails pushing her toward exciting new horizons. The weekend photography workshops started next. Owen recommended a series of advanced courses focusing on outdoor photography and photojournalism ethics, held at locations around Tennessee that required overnight camping trips. Jessica signed up immediately, purchasing expensive new equipment and outdoor gear that seemed designed more for expeditions to remote wilderness areas than weekend workshops in state parks. "I need to expand my skill set," she explained, showing me a high-end camera backpack that cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. Owen says the best travel photographers are completely self-sufficient. They can handle any environment, any lighting condition, any unexpected situation that develops in the field. What struck me wasn't her desire to improve her skills, but the complete shift in her interests. 6 months earlier, Jessica had been passionate about documenting Nashville's local art scene, finding beauty in urban environments, and telling stories about the people who made our city unique. Now she talked constantly about authentic experiences and living without boundaries and not letting fear dictate your choices, phrases that sounded suspiciously like Owen's philosophy rather than her own thoughts. When I suggested we plan a vacation together, maybe visit some of the national parks she'd been photographing, Jessica deflected immediately. I can't really commit to travel plans right now, she said. Owen thinks there might be some last-minute assignment opportunities coming up, and I need to stay flexible and available. You understand, right? This could be my chance to break into national publications. I understood that I was no longer part of her future plans, that somewhere along the way I'd become an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to share experiences with. But understanding something and knowing how to respond to it are entirely different challenges, and I found myself hoping that Jessica's fascination with Owen's lifestyle would burn out once she realized the practical realities of living without stability or commitment to anything beyond the next exciting assignment. The phone calls started during our dinner time. Jessica's phone would buzz, she'd glance at the screen, and suddenly her entire demeanor would shift. "Sorry, I need to take this, it's work-related," she'd say, stepping onto our porch or disappearing upstairs to our bedroom. These conversations could last anywhere from 20 minutes to over an hour, and when she'd return, she'd be energized in a way that our quiet dinners together never seemed to inspire anymore. "Owen has some incredible news about a potential assignment," she'd explain, settling back at the table where her food had gone cold. "A magazine in Denver wants to feature his work on backcountry skiing, and they're looking for a writer who understands outdoor culture. He thinks I'd be perfect for it, but we need to put together a proposal really quickly." I'd nod and ask appropriate questions about deadlines and requirements, but Jessica's answers were always vague, focused more on Owen's vision for the project than any concrete details about her actual writing responsibilities. What bothered me most wasn't the secrecy around these calls, but how Jessica's whole energy would shift during them. I could hear her laughing from upstairs, her voice taking on this animated quality that I hadn't heard in months when she talked to me. The weekend work sessions became routine. Jessica would leave Saturday morning for collaborative planning meetings at coffee shops around Nashville, returning home late afternoon with new ideas and barely contained excitement about whatever project she and Owen were developing. She'd spend Sunday organizing her notes and photos, but when I'd ask to see her work or offer to help with research, she'd deflect by saying everything was still in early stages and not ready for outside input. "Owen has this really specific creative process," she explained when I suggested she work from our home office instead of constantly meeting at various locations around the city. "He needs to be in different environments to think clearly, and honestly, being in the house makes me feel too domestic, too settled. I do my best thinking when I'm out in the world, experiencing things firsthand rather than sitting at a desk." Our physical intimacy evaporated completely. Jessica started going to bed much later than me, claiming she was most creative during evening hours and didn't want to interrupt her workflow. When she finally came to bed, she'd be exhausted from her long days and weekend projects. Morning became rushed affairs where she'd shower quickly and leave early for the magazine office, often skipping breakfast and claiming she'd grab something on the way. When I tried to address the growing distance between us, Jessica would turn the conversation into an argument about my expectations and insecurities. "You're being possessive," she'd say. "This is exactly what I was talking about when I said I felt trapped. You want me to account for every hour of my day and check in constantly like some kind of parole officer. Can't you see how suffocating that is?" But I wasn't asking her to account for every hour. I was asking her to show up for our relationship in any meaningful way. I was asking her to have dinner conversations that didn't revolve around Owen's adventures, to spend weekends together occasionally, to act like we were building something together rather than her using our house as a convenient place to sleep between her real-life experiences. The redecorating started without discussion. I came home one evening to find that Jessica had rearranged our living room completely, replacing our comfortable sectional sofa with floor cushions and low tables that she claimed created better energy flow for creative thinking. The family photos we displayed on the mantel had been replaced with Jessica's artistic shots from her various assignments, and she'd hung several of Owen's photographs prominently throughout the room. "I hope you don't mind," she said, not sounding particularly concerned about whether I minded. "Owen helped me see how conventional our space had become. He says your environment shapes your consciousness, and if you want to think like an artist, you need to live like one. Don't you think this feels more authentic, more alive?" I looked around at our transformed living room, which no longer felt like our space but rather like a gallery showcasing Jessica's new aesthetic preferences. Owen's photographs dominated the walls, dramatic shots of mountain climbers and surfers that were undeniably beautiful but felt completely disconnected from our life in Nashville. My books had been relocated to less prominent shelves, replaced with photography collections and travel guides to places Jessica had never mentioned wanting to visit before meeting Owen. "Where's the photo from our trip to Gatlinburg last year?" I asked, noticing it had been removed from its spot near the fireplace. "Oh, that," Jessica waved dismissively. "It didn't fit with the new vibe. Besides, that whole trip feels so long ago, like a completely different phase of my life. I'm trying to focus on who I'm becoming rather than who I used to be." The person she was becoming, apparently, was someone who found our shared memories irrelevant and our home's previous warmth incompatible with her artistic evolution. I realized that Jessica wasn't just emotionally disconnecting from our relationship, she was systematically erasing evidence that we'd ever been happy together, creating a physical environment that reflected her new priorities and explicitly excluded me from her vision of the future. I decided to plan a surprise housewarming party for our newly renovated home, thinking it might remind Jessica of what we'd built together and reconnect her with the people who'd been part of our life before Owen dominated every conversation. We'd been homeowners for exactly 2 years, and despite all the recent tension, I wanted to celebrate that milestone with our friends and family. I spent 3 weeks coordinating the event, hiring Jessica's favorite caterer from downtown Nashville, the one who'd catered her college graduation party, and creating a photo slideshow of our renovation journey and memories together. I invited everyone who mattered to us, Jessica's parents and sister, my family, colleagues from both our jobs, and the friends we'd made as a couple during our first year in the house. I even tracked down some of Jessica's journalism classmates who'd moved to other cities but happened to be visiting Nashville that weekend. The planning felt therapeutic, reminding me of all the people who'd witnessed our happiness and supported our relationship when things were good between us. The caterer arrived Saturday afternoon with Jessica's favorite foods, Korean barbecue tacos, gourmet mac and cheese, and those mini key lime pies she discovered at the farmer's market. I set up the photo slideshow in our living room, despite Jessica's recent redecorating, and arranged the furniture to encourage conversation and mingling. By 6 o'clock, our house was filled with laughter, music, and the warm energy of people who genuinely cared about us. Jessica walked through the front door at 6:47 p.m. to find our home packed with surprised guests calling out, "Happy anniversary." Her face went through a series of expressions I'll never forget: initial confusion, dawning recognition, then something that looked almost like panic. Instead of the joy or gratitude I'd expected, Jessica looked trapped, like I'd sprung an elaborate ambush designed to force her into playing a role she no longer wanted to perform. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "A surprise party," I said, suddenly feeling foolish as I watched her scan the room full of people who'd come to celebrate us. "It's our 2-year house anniversary. I thought it would be nice to acknowledge what we've accomplished together." Jessica's sister approached with a drink, oblivious to the tension. "Isn't this amazing, Jess? Tyler put so much thought into this. Mom and Dad have been looking forward to seeing your renovations for months." "I need to talk to you," Jessica said, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the kitchen. "Privately." In the kitchen, away from our guests, Jessica's composure cracked completely. "How could you do this without consulting me? I had plans tonight. Important plans. Owen's art exhibition opening is across town, and I promised I'd be there. This is exactly what I've been talking about, you making decisions about my life without considering what I actually want." "I wanted it to be a surprise," I said, feeling increasingly defensive. "These are our friends and family. They drove hours to be here, and your parents specifically asked when they'd get to see the house renovations." "That's not the point." Jessica's voice was rising, and I could see our guests glancing toward the kitchen with concerned expressions. "The point is that you planned this entire evening around your vision of what our life should look like, without caring about what I might have wanted to do instead. It's controlling and manipulative." I stared at her, realizing that what I'd intended as a loving gesture had become another piece of evidence in her case against our relationship. "Owen's art exhibition," I repeated slowly. "More important than celebrating what we've built together." "Yes," she said without hesitation. Because Owen's work represents growth and possibility and authentic artistic expression. This party represents everything I'm trying to move beyond. Playing house and pretending like domestic life is the height of human achievement. The cruelty of that statement hit me like physical blow. 2 years of mortgage payments, renovations, compromise, and shared dreams reduced to playing house. Our friends and family dismissed as obstacles to her authentic artistic expression. I looked through the kitchen doorway at the people who'd come to celebrate us, people who'd been part of our story when Jessica still considered it worth telling. "These people love you," I said quietly. "Your parents drove 3 hours to be here. Your college roommate flew in from Atlanta. But you'd rather abandon them all to go look at photographs with Owen." "I'd rather be somewhere I can breathe," Jessica snapped. "Somewhere I don't feel like I'm suffocating under everyone's expectations of who I'm supposed to be." That's when she did something I never expected. Instead of stepping back into our living room and gracefully handling the situation like the intelligent, socially aware person I'd fallen in love with, Jessica walked directly into the party and made an announcement. "I'm sorry everyone came tonight," she said, her voice carrying over the conversation and music. "Tyler planned this without discussing it with me, and I have other commitments I need to honor. I hope you understand that sometimes people grow in different directions, and staying true to yourself means disappointing others' conventional expectations." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's mother looked genuinely confused, my sister's face showed pure anger, and our friends exchanged glances that clearly questioned what they'd just witnessed. Jessica grabbed her purse, kissed her parents perfunctorily, and headed for the door. "Tell Owen I said congratulations on his exhibition," I called after her, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. She paused at the door, looked back at me standing in our beautifully decorated home surrounded by people who cared about us, and said, "At least Owen understands the difference between supporting someone's dreams and trying to trap them in a life they've outgrown." After she left, I spent the most humiliating evening of my adult life explaining Jessica's absence to our bewildered guests, making excuses for behavior that had no reasonable excuse, and watching people who'd driven hours to celebrate us leave early because the situation had become too uncomfortable to endure. Her parents stayed until the end, helping me clean up while carefully avoiding direct conversation about their daughter's public rejection of everything we'd built together. Jessica returned the next morning around 10 a.m., looking exhausted and slightly hungover, carrying coffee from the expensive downtown shop she'd started frequenting with Owen's crowd. I was sitting at our kitchen table with my laptop, researching real estate agents and trying to determine our house's current market value. She set down her coffee and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part guilt, part defiance, and something that might have been relief. "We need to have a serious conversation about us," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "Last night made it clear that we want completely different things from life, and I don't think it's fair to either of us to keep pretending otherwise." I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention, though part of me already knew where this conversation was heading based on her body language and the careful way she was choosing her words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Jessica continued, "about who I am and what I want from my 20s, from my career, from life in general. I think I need some time to explore what else is out there, to figure out who I am outside of this relationship, outside of this domestic situation we've created." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "I think we should take a temporary separation," she said, the words coming out in a rush like she'd been practicing them. "Nothing permanent, just some space for me to experience life independently and discover what I actually want instead of what I think I'm supposed to want. You're an incredible person, Tyler, but I worry that I settled down too quickly, before I really knew myself or explored my options." Jessica wanted permission to pursue whatever was developing with Owen while keeping our house, our relationship, and our shared life as a safety net in case her exploration didn't work out as planned. She wanted the security of knowing she could come back to our stable situation if her adventures with Owen proved disappointing or unsustainable. "How long is temporary?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe 6 months? Maybe a year? I just need to see what's possible when I'm not limiting myself to one person's vision of what my life should look like." "Owen thinks." Stop, I interrupted. Don't tell me what Owen thinks about our relationship. I really don't want to hear his analysis of our situation. Jessica's face flushed. This isn't about Owen. This is about me needing to grow as a person and artist without feeling guilty about disappointing someone else's expectations. But it was absolutely about Owen, and we both knew it. Jessica wanted to explore a relationship with him without the messy complications of officially ending things with me first. She wanted to have her adventure while keeping our house as her permanent address and our relationship as her backup plan. I stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at our garden where Jessica used to photograph flowers and insects during her more domestic phase. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was asking for freedom to explore just as spring was arriving and our yard was becoming beautiful again. Okay, I said, turning back to face her. If you want to explore what else is out there, you should do that completely freely, without any obligations to me or this life we've built together. Jessica's expression shifted from relief to confusion. What do you mean? I mean, if you're going to leave, then leave completely. Don't keep one foot in this relationship while you test out other possibilities. That's not fair to me, and honestly, it's not fair to you either. I walked back to the table and reopened my laptop, pulling up the real estate website I'd been browsing. I'm putting the house on the market this week. If you want to explore who you are independently, then you should do that without the security blanket of knowing you can always come back to our shared life if things don't work out. The color drained from Jessica's face. Tyler, you're being extreme. I never said I wanted to end things permanently. I just need some space to figure out what I want. And I need some space to figure out what I deserve, I replied calmly. I deserve to be with someone who chooses me actively, not someone who sees me as the safe option while she explores more exciting alternatives. Jessica started crying then, but they weren't the manipulative tears she'd used during previous arguments. These seemed like genuine panic at the realization that her safety net was disappearing. You can't just sell our house, she said. We put so much work into it. This is our home. It was our home, I corrected. But you just told me you need to discover who you are outside of this domestic situation. So let's eliminate the situation entirely and see what we both discover about ourselves. I called the real estate agent that afternoon while Jessica was upstairs packing some clothes. By evening, we had an appointment to discuss listing price and marketing strategy. Jessica spent the next few days alternating between angry accusations that I was being vindictive and desperate attempts to negotiate some middle ground where she could have her exploration time while keeping our relationship on hold. This isn't what I wanted, she said on Wednesday evening as the for sale sign was installed in our front yard. I wanted us to grow together, just with some healthy space for individual development. No, I said, watching our neighbors notice the sign and start texting each other. You wanted me to wait around as your backup plan while you figured out if Owen's lifestyle was more appealing than what we'd built together. I'm choosing not to be anyone's second choice. The house sold in 3 weeks to a young couple who reminded me painfully of Jessica and me 2 years earlier, full of excitement about renovating the space and building their future together. Jessica watched the closing process with increasing desperation, finally understanding that I wasn't bluffing or trying to manipulate her into changing her mind. I was genuinely letting her go, completely and permanently, exactly as she'd said she wanted. I'd been secretly job hunting for weeks, reaching out to contacts in other cities and exploring opportunities that would give me a completely fresh start. When a desert research facility in Tucson, Arizona offered me a senior analyst position with a significant salary increase and the chance to work on renewable energy projects, I accepted immediately. The work was fascinating, analyzing solar and wind energy efficiency data in one of the country's most promising renewable energy markets, and the complete change of environment felt like exactly what I needed. Jessica was staying at Owen's apartment during the final weeks before our house closing, supposedly to give me space to handle the logistics, but really because their relationship had accelerated once she'd committed to leaving me. I didn't tell her about my job search or my plans to leave Nashville entirely. She'd made it clear that my life and decisions were no longer her concern, so I returned the favor by making my major life changes without consulting her. 2 days after we signed the closing paperwork, I loaded everything I owned into a rented moving truck and drove 12 hours straight to Tucson. I'd found a small adobe house near the Catalina Mountains, surrounded by desert landscape that felt like living on another planet compared to Nashville's green hills and humid summers. The house had huge windows that showcased incredible sunrise and sunset views, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe deeply again. I deliberately didn't update my social media with my new location, blocked Jessica on all platforms, and changed my phone number. I wanted a completely clean break from our shared life in Nashville, with no possibility for Jessica to reach out when her exploration phase inevitably hit complications. I'd learned from watching too many friends get emotionally manipulated by exes who kept them on standby for comfort and validation. My new routine was simple and satisfying. I'd wake up early to watch the sunrise over the mountains, work from home analyzing renewable energy data, then spend evenings exploring desert trails and learning desert photography. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, demanding respect and offering rewards to anyone patient enough to understand its rhythms. I started taking photography seriously for the first time, capturing images of saguaro cacti, desert storms, and wildlife that looked nothing like the artistic shots Jessica used to take of Nashville's urban environment. 5 weeks into my new life, my sister called with an update I hadn't requested but somehow wasn't surprised to receive. "Jessica's been calling everyone trying to find you," Sarah told me during our weekly check-in call. "Mom, Dad, your old colleagues, even your college roommate. She sounds completely panicked, keeps saying there's been some kind of misunderstanding and she needs to talk to you immediately." "What did you tell her?" I asked, watching a roadrunner dart between the cacti in my backyard. "Exactly what you asked me to say, that you're doing well but don't want contact with her. But Tyler, she's really persistent. She called Mom 3 times yesterday, crying about how she made a terrible mistake and needs to explain everything to you." I wasn't surprised that Jessica's adventure with Owen had ended badly. Owen struck me as someone who enjoyed the chase and the conquest but lost interest once the challenge disappeared. Jessica had probably discovered that his exciting, boundary-free lifestyle didn't include room for emotional commitment or the kind of security she'd taken for granted in our relationship. "She keeps saying she never meant to end things permanently," Sarah continued. "Claims she just needed some space to grow, and now she realizes what she lost. Mom actually felt sorry for her, which is saying something considering how angry she was about that party situation." "And how did Owen's photography career work out for her?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Apparently he started dating someone else almost immediately after she moved in with him. Some travel blogger who's supposed to accompany him on assignments around the country. Jessica found out when she saw them together at some art gallery opening, same night she thought they were supposed to be working on a project together. The irony was almost perfect. Jessica had thrown away our stable, loving relationship for the excitement of being with someone who lived without boundaries or commitments, only to discover that his lack of boundaries applied to her too. Owen had never promised her exclusivity or emotional security. She'd projected those expectations onto him based on her own romantic fantasies about adventurous men. "She's been asking everyone if they know where you went," Sarah said. "Keeps saying she just needs 5 minutes to explain everything, that you'd understand if you knew the whole story. Mom told her that maybe some explanations come too late, and that seemed to make her cry harder." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and genuine sadness for Jessica. Vindication because her behavior had consequences she'd never anticipated, and sadness because the woman I'd loved had made choices that destroyed something real for the sake of something that turned out to be entirely illusory. But I didn't feel any desire to rescue her from the situation she'd created for herself. "If she calls again, you can tell her I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I said. "Building a life with someone who won't take it for granted." "Are you seeing someone new?" Sarah asked with interest. "Not yet," I admitted. "But I'm building something here that belongs completely to me. When I'm ready to share it with someone, it'll be with a person who appreciates stability instead of finding it suffocating." That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of pink and gold, thinking about the difference between excitement and contentment. Jessica had confused excitement with love, adventure with growth, and novelty with authenticity. She'd convinced herself that anything stable or predictable was somehow limiting her potential, when in reality, stability had given her the foundation to explore her interests safely. The desert taught different lessons. Survival here required patience, planning, and respect for natural limits. The most beautiful flowers bloomed briefly after rare rainstorms, but the plants that thrived year-round were the ones that had learned to build deep root systems and conserve resources carefully. I was learning to be more like the desert plants, finding beauty in sustainability rather than chasing brief, dramatic moments that couldn't be sustained long-term. My phone stayed silent, which meant Jessica still hadn't figured out how to reach me directly. But I knew she was out there somewhere, probably still calling my family members and old friends, still believing that if she could just explain her side of the story, everything could somehow return to the way it used to be. She'd never understood that some decisions permanently change the landscape and that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt.